Good morning, everybody. Hello, good morning. Great. Please do allow me to adopt the protocols as set out by Irene, again, for the sake of time. And thanks to all of you for being here this morning. We have come from far. Let me give you a little story about accessibility. In 1989, I was privileged to visit the UK and take a look at what persons with disabilities were doing to cope with independent living and all that technology demanded of them. I was indeed happy to visit a friend of mine. We were in the law school together. And I asked him, Victor, how do you go about your research and writing and all that? And he told me, I want to show you something. And he got onto his computer keyboard. And I heard voices coming from that machine. And he told me this is what we call a talking computer. It came at a cost. Little did I know that a few months later, in September 1989, I would be admitted to the London School of Economics, and here I am armed with my umbrella and my Olympic, I think it was called Olympic typewriter. And the first thing I was told is that we do not type papers here. We use computers. So we very quickly assembled funds, what I had saved, and little donations here and there. And we got a laptop. I had never seen a computer before, or at least never used one before. And to make it worse, how to learn and continue with my master's degree program, typing papers for myself. A talking laptop. This technology is a lifesaver to many of us. But do we ever realize it? Do we really know the cost it takes for a person with disability, particularly visual impairment, to get along with work in the usual way, career the research, and all that? The foundation of all this really is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And some of you will remember our brothers like Sam Kabwe, who are in the team that assembled the CRPD. And before the convention came into force, we already had our Persons with Disabilities Act of 2003. 8 years later, the CRPD became real. It came into force. And of course, it did obligate state parties to take action to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities were not only promoted, but as well promoted. And that also led to the promulgation of our Constitution in the year 2010. Those of you who've gone through it will appreciate how diverse that Constitution is in ensuring that the rights of persons with disabilities are not just promoted, but also protected. It is on the basis of that that the 2025 Persons with Disabilities Act was again enacted and came into force on 27th May this year. We've come a long way. That reform process began when I sat in the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution, privileged to lead a team that had to comb through all the technical and diverse requisite considerations to ensure that we were in step with the fast-moving digital economy, among other things that our accessibility demands. Of course, the journey was not easy because we had disagreements on various things. Should the National Council for Persons with Disabilities have any executive powers? Should it create certain institutions? Should we relinquish the fund that was anchored on the Persons with Disabilities Act to the Finance Management Act? And it took quite a while. It took years to come to agreement and allow the act to be passed in the manner in which it is now. This has not been an easy journey. Indeed, every time we have convened as Enable with all our development partners and friends who join us, each time we have our conferences, it really is very humbling to see what many are doing to ensure that persons with disabilities access technology on an equal basis. Having said that, though, we know that our forces are limited. We are fighting battles with very few weapons in the way of resource mobilization. We are very lean in finances, and that is why we convene here today. And I will depart largely from my paper, which I believe will be shared, just so that I may air some of the main concerns here. When you look at accessibility, of course, we trace it all back to the UN Convention, which is now mirrored by our Constitution and now our 2025 Act. Now, what that UN Convention does is to obligate parties to ensure that they formulate policies, legislation, administrative frameworks, plans and actions for the promotion and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities. Most of you here will agree with me that this country, Kenya, which most of you seated here are citizens, has some of the most elegant legislative and policy instruments. That you will agree that we set the pace globally in the continent to ensure that we have legislative frameworks that are well suited to ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are not only promoted but also protected. But what we very often forget is that it is one thing to have suitable legislation, suitable policies, to have groundbreaking programs. But unless we make those rights real, by making sure that those to whom those instruments are intended to benefit actually get those benefits. If you reflect, and I ask this of persons with disabilities here, they will tell you that access to education, access to training and skills development, access to employment, reasonable accommodation, independent living, information, access to information, and social inclusion have big limitations for us. Why? The innovators are doing their best. Development partners are doing their best to give a hand. But our governments, and I'm saying this of Africa and globally, having passed very flowery legislation, have limited budgetary allocations to ensure that the cost of accessibility is brought down. While the ordinary child will be happy to get a pen for 100 shillings, the equivalent of perhaps $1, and go to school and happily take their notes, a child with visual disability or a blind child will require, I think, upward of 120,000 shillings to get a braille. How equal are those children? How equal are those children when a government capitation to take account of the needs, special needs of a child is, what's the allowance nowadays? I think some time back it was just 2,000 or some hundreds for a child. What does that tell you? The parents have to scratch. They have to ask themselves, where do we get a braille from? How do we raise this money? So that when you visit schools for the blind, you will find kids who have to make do with one instrument for a number of them, taking turns. Do we let our children at home take turns in picking up their pencils and pens to write their notes? We don't. So why these children? And that's why we are here. It's one thing, of course, to have all that by way of the legislative frameworks and the likes, but accessibility is way, way, way beyond our reach. Today, technology has taken great strides. It derives from innovations that are keeping up with an economy that is becoming digital each day. But how do we cope with that pace? That is why digital accessibility becomes important. It becomes important for all of us, just so that we keep up at the workplace, we keep up with education, research for those who are higher up in education pursuits. Virtual platforms are emerging at the workplace. It is expected of us to get the requisite, not just the equipment, the software that takes turns, twists and turns, changing every day, subscriptions, and all. Can we then say we really are equal when there are those who spend the best of their livelihood trying to keep up with the digital accessibility? Can we say we are equal and that there are no discriminatory factors in our daily lives when we are unable to keep up with the expense of digital accessibility as persons with disability? You begin to see how important it is to address these key issues. Well, we do appreciate that there are there are policies to ensure that at least tax considerations are in place, just so that when we get some of these assistive devices and technology, we are exempt from taxes. But they come at a cost. So where are we as a country, where are we as a community of nations to try and see to it that indeed the equality and non-discrimination, the equal access we talk about in the CRPD, in our constitutions, in our legislation, is a real thing. And that is not just something we are talking about here. While the Constitution guarantees the right to equality and non-discrimination, the situation on the ground is very different. Others have to spend much more than the rest of the populations to keep up with these demands. And indeed, the disability sector has been left to its own to try and figure out what is often seen as their problem. Well, the 2025 Act has done a great deal to ensure that at least there is a demarcation of tasks between the national government and the county governments. The national government, of course, is tasked with policy, legislation, plans, programs, and guidelines to guide the process. County governments are left with the task of implementation and data, and of course, maintaining data for persons with disabilities, and giving them the respective platforms and registration of various groups that, of course, advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. That's all very well. But what would we say about the resources needed to reach, or rather to get to that envisioned goal? You will agree with me that we're always talking about money, money, money. Somebody was telling me some time back that disability no longer sells. It no longer sells. Perhaps what sells is something else, but disability doesn't sell. What do we mean by it doesn't sell? Very few are committed to joining hands to ensure that resources are mobilized to ensure accessibility in this fast-moving digital world, in education, in employment, in skills development and all. When COVID set in, I was then teaching at the University of Embu Law School, having been the founder dean there and getting down to work. Then COVID comes and we ask ourselves, how do we deal with all this? And for the first time, I saw virtual platforms in action. For 1.5 years before I joined the judiciary, I taught from the comfort of my home library. How about those children with disabilities? Or even other students who had only a smartphone to access those virtual lectures. Some of them drop out mid-lectures. Others have to wait and borrow notes from those who have that equipment to be able to join in and write notes and be able to at least get the benefit of those lectures. Today, the court in which I serve is 100% virtual. 100%. Figure out consumers of justice who do not have accessible technology to join in. It's a big negative for them. It's a big challenge for them. So as we sit here discussing accessibility, it's not just about what we understand to be the product of innovators. It is putting together our recollection of how far we have come, what the innovators have done, the capital they have employed to ensure that devices like this one are accessible. That persons with disabilities are taken care of when it comes to technology, but at what cost? They put in their capital. How many would afford that technology? And we do appreciate that for them, perhaps it's not just a profit-driven venture, much as they want returns as well. So we must continue to ask ourselves, what are we doing as governments? What are we doing as development partners, as state and non-state agencies to support that deficit in budgetary allocation and the ability of those who are not able to access those devices and technology, to access programs that are ever-changing, at a subscription that is back-breaking, and at the end of the day, they are all left behind. Can we, in those situations, talk of equality and non-discrimination? Can we, in those situations, say that we have accorded each one of our citizens' accessibility as the Constitution demands, as the UN Convention demands. Granted that the 2025 Act goes further to provide incentives for persons with, or rather reliefs for persons with disabilities so that they can meet their disability costs and incentives to employers who provide reasonable accessibility. And I must really commend those of our employers who've made it possible for us to have devices and accessible technology that makes our work easier. And of course, we must appreciate the fact that each one of us has a hand in it. The Act also goes further to provide reliefs even for parents with children with disabilities. And it goes on to ensure that any employer who grants, or rather who provides reasonable accessibility, reasonable accommodation to their employees with disabilities also enjoy certain tax reliefs on account of the cost that they incur. In conclusion, let me ask each one of us seated here today to ask themselves one simple question. If I had a disability like so-and-so, like so-and-so, like so-and-so, how would I want to be treated? What would I want as a hand given me by those in government and in other non-state agencies to ensure that what I cannot afford by way of technology, I nonetheless get it? I know the National Fund did quite a bit to ensure that we had computers or laptops given to university students as far back as, I can't remember the year. I think Senator Mora remembers when we did mobilize equipment for students in Kenyatta University. And recently, we had the privilege of enjoying the support of one of our development partners also in getting us 20 laptops for third-year students in Kenyatta and University and University of Nairobi Law School. May I challenge you, and perhaps by the end of this conference, maybe you could give me 20, 30, 50 addresses of those who are willing to contribute. Just one laptop per agent, per agency, and we know which hands to place those laptops on. You can give that to Irene or to myself or to Mbura, he is here. Julius Mbura is one of us, a very hardworking young man with visual disability, and many others with whom the Enable team has benefited a great deal. And let me stop there by thanking the Enable team, the staff, the secretariat, who worked tirelessly to ensure that our agenda is driven with the resolve as we see in the attendance of this conference today. You will then forgive me for taking more than the 5 to 10 minutes that I was given, and I believe it was for good cause. But thanks very much, and welcome to you all. Enjoy the conference.